You testified you only learned of the pregnancy on the 12th. Yet this log shows you searched unwanted pregnancy on the 10th. Were you lying to the police then, Mr. McCaffrey, or are you lying to this jury right now?
I don't remember the exact dates. I was confused.
The brass key was never meant to unlock a murder scene, but on October 12, 2022, that's exactly what it became. When Olivia Holloway arrived at McCaffrey Vineyards that evening, the custom engraved key in her purse was supposed to be a romantic surprise for her fiancé, Liam, the key to their private blending cellar, their wedding just 2 weeks away. Instead, by midnight, Olivia lay dead on that cellar floor, that same key now tagged as Exhibit A in a murder investigation that would tear apart two families and shock Kansas City's wine community to its core. Liam McCaffrey had made his choice: silence his pregnant fiancée rather than face his financial deception. I know this is one of the most devastating true crime cases we've covered on this channel, and if you're finding it as powerful as I am, please hit that subscribe button to support more in-depth coverage like this. I'd love to hear where you're watching from, so drop your location in the comments while we continue with this heartbreaking story. Detective Daniel Adams pulled into the gravel parking lot of McCaffrey Vineyards at 11:17 p.m., responding to a concerned call from Bernadette Holloway, who hadn't heard from her daughter since that morning. The late autumn air carried the sweet scent of fermenting grapes as he approached the main production building, where a single light glowed from the large warehouse-like structure that housed the fermentation tanks. He noted Olivia's blue Mazda still parked in the visitor section, its presence contradicting the initial report from Liam McCaffrey, claiming his fiancée had never arrived at the vineyard that evening. The first red flag in what would become a textbook case of domestic homicide was already waving as Adams stepped from his vehicle, his experienced eyes taking in the contradictions before him. As Adams entered the building, the sharp smell of bleach overwhelmed the usual vineyard aromas, and he found Liam McCaffrey on his hands and knees, vigorously scrubbing the concrete floor near one of the large steel fermentation tanks. "Just getting ahead on harvest cleanup," Liam explained, with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes, his designer watch incongruous against the yellow rubber gloves he wore. Adams noticed the slight tremble in Liam's hands as he set aside his cleaning brush and stood to greet the detective, casual demeanor betrayed by beads of sweat forming despite the cool evening temperatures. The careful choreography of Liam's movements suggested to Adams that this wasn't routine cleaning, but a desperate attempt to eliminate evidence, a suspicion that solidified when he spotted a small smear of what appeared to be blood, partially visible beneath the edge of a nearby tank. "When did you last see your fiancée, Mr. McCaffrey?" Adams asked, watching as Liam's eyes darted briefly toward the narrow hallway leading to the cellar door, before claiming Olivia had texted saying she'd meet him at home but never arrived. The detective made note of Liam's designer clothes, now stained with bleach and what might be wine, hardly the attire one would choose for deep cleaning, and the telltale scratch marks on his forearm that appeared fresh and defensive in nature. Liam's story about Olivia's plans continuously shifted during their initial conversation, first claiming she had canceled their meeting entirely, then suggesting she had briefly stopped by but left to run errands, his inconsistencies mounting with each question Adams calmly posed. Detective Adams requested permission to look around the property while they waited for Olivia to turn up, a suggestion that caused Liam's composure to briefly falter. The winery heir led Adams through the main production area with obvious reluctance, providing unnecessary details about fermentation processes and the upcoming harvest, as if to distract from the task at hand. His nervous monologue about barrel aging techniques abruptly stopped when Adams inquired about accessing the private blending cellar, a special room Bernadette had mentioned while reporting her daughter missing. "That's locked, and only my father and I have keys," Liam said too quickly, his hand instinctively reaching toward his pocket before stopping himself. "And it's just storage, really nothing to see." Adams noted how Liam steered him away from the cellar entrance, insisting they check the office areas instead, where staff might have seen Olivia earlier. The detective allowed himself to be redirected, recognizing the signs of someone establishing barriers to a critical location, a textbook behavior he'd encountered in numerous homicide investigations. He maintained a conversational tone as he asked about the winery's security cameras, watching Liam's expression tighten at the mention of surveillance footage that might reveal the truth of Olivia's movements that evening. Liam's explanation that the system had been on the fritz for several days struck Adams as conveniently timed, especially when coupled with Liam's increasing insistence that they should check Olivia's apartment rather than continue searching the vineyard. The investigation took its first critical turn when Officer Rodriguez, who had been canvassing the parking lot, radioed to report finding Olivia's purse under the passenger seat of her locked car. As Adams relayed this information, Liam's facade of cooperation completely collapsed, his face draining of color as he stammered about needing to make some calls. The detective observed how Liam's right hand kept returning to his pocket, seemingly checking for something important, a gesture that would later take on profound significance when they discovered what was missing from that pocket. Adams knew then that whatever had happened to Olivia Holloway, the answers lay somewhere within the winery property, most likely behind the locked door that Liam seemed so determined to keep him from approaching. As midnight approached, Adams requested additional units and forensic support, his instincts telling him this was no longer a missing person case, but something far more sinister. The detective maintained visual contact with Liam while discreetly photographing the bleach-cleaned areas and what appeared to be bloody shoe prints, partially visible despite Liam's cleaning efforts. With each passing minute, Liam's behavior became increasingly erratic, checking his watch, suggesting they leave to check hospitals, and at one point attempting to call his father before Adams gently suggested they focus on the immediate search. It was when Adams mentioned obtaining a warrant for the locked cellar that Liam's composure completely shattered, his face contorting in panic as he blurted, "You can't go in there until I speak with my attorney." Phase 2, the discovery of Olivia Holloway's body, came at 2:37 a.m. on October 13th, after Judge Marianne Grissom signed an emergency warrant allowing Detective Adams to access the private blending cellar at McCaffrey Vineyards. Liam McCaffrey, by then visibly distraught and flanked by hastily summoned attorney Winston Porter, stood rigid as the locksmith worked on the heavy oak door leading to the cellar. The air in the narrow stone stairwell grew thick with tension as Adams descended, the beam of his flashlight cutting through decades of carefully cultivated darkness designed to protect the winery's most precious vintages. What the light revealed instead was Olivia Holloway's body sprawled beside an antique blending table, her white blouse stained crimson with both wine and blood, her engagement ring catching the light as her lifeless hand rested near an overturned bottle of the winery's rare 2019 Cabernet. The cellar told a story that contradicted every claim Liam had made during the preceding hours of questioning. Wine glasses on the blending table, one with Olivia's lipstick still visible on the rim, the other, with clear fingerprints later identified as Liam's, suggested they had been sharing a tasting rather than having never met that evening. The positioning of her body, partially hidden behind a rack of barrels, but with defensive wounds clearly visible on her forearms, indicated a violent struggle rather than an accident. Most damning of all was the cellar door itself, locked from the outside with a key that should have been in Olivia's possession, a key that was conspicuously missing from her recovered purse and from the scene itself. Forensic technician Marissa Chen documented the scene meticulously, paying particular attention to the blood spatter patterns that told the story of Olivia's final moments. The victim was struck first near the blending table, Chen would later testify, indicating how Olivia had likely been seated when the attack began. The evidence suggested Olivia had fought back with surprising strength, managing to knock over several bottles and even break one, which she had apparently tried to use as a weapon in self-defense. Chen's careful analysis revealed wine and blood intermingled on the stone floor, creating a macabre tableau against the rich wooden barrels that lined the walls, barrels containing vintages that would never be bottled, forever tainted by their witness to murder. Detective Adams focused on the central question that would drive the early investigation. Who had locked the cellar door, trapping Olivia inside? The answer seemed to point directly to Liam, who had claimed all evening that only he and his father possessed keys to this room, yet whose key was still in his possession when officers searched him. "If your key is here," Adams asked, while holding up the evidence bag containing Liam's key ring, "and you say only 2 keys exist, then how was this door locked from the outside after Olivia entered?" Liam's response, silence followed by a whispered consultation with his attorney, would be the first of many damning moments captured in the case files and later played for the jury during his trial. The medical examiner, Dr. Eleanor Park, arrived as dawn broke over the Kansas City skyline, the vineyard's picturesque rows of vines incongruously beautiful against the grim task unfolding in the cellar below. Her preliminary examination indicated Olivia had died from blunt force trauma to the head, likely from the corner of the heavy oak blending table, where significant blood evidence and hair fragments were collected. Time of death approximately between 5:30 and 7 p.m., Dr. Park noted in her initial report, a timeline that directly contradicted Liam's claim that he had left the winery at 4 p.m. and gone directly home. The revelation that would later shake the courtroom to its core, Olivia's pregnancy, remained undiscovered until the full autopsy, its significance adding another layer to the already compelling motive taking shape in the minds of the investigation team. As crime scene technicians processed the cellar, Detective Adams turned his attention to the second critical piece of evidence, the missing key. "We need to find the key that locked this door," he instructed his team, understanding that whoever possessed it would be directly linked to Olivia's murder. The search extended throughout the winery property, with officers meticulously combing the production floors, offices, and surrounding grounds for any sign of the distinctive brass key. Meanwhile, Liam McCaffrey was transported to the Kansas City Police Department's Central Precinct, his initial cooperative demeanor now replaced with stony silence, as Porter advised him against making any further statements without formal charges being filed. The breakthrough came not at the winery, but in Liam's personal vehicle, a black Ford F-150 parked at his apartment complex where officers executed a search warrant later that morning. Detective Rachel Winters, leading the secondary search team, discovered a toolbox secured in the truck bed containing various winery tools and, hidden beneath a false bottom, a brass key with distinct micro-scratches around its teeth. The key was wiped clean of prints, Winters reported to Adams via phone, but there appears to be some kind of substance in the grooves that might be blood. The discovery of this hidden duplicate key, one whose existence Liam had explicitly denied, shifted the investigation from building circumstantial evidence to establishing direct links between the suspect and the crime scene. Bernadette and Marcus Holloway arrived at the precinct as news of their daughter's death became impossible to shield from them any longer. Their grief manifested in different but equally heart-wrenching ways. Bernadette collapsed into a chair, physically unable to stand as the detective's words confirmed her worst fears, while Marcus remained rigidly upright, his face a mask of shock, as tears silently tracked down his weathered cheeks. "She was so happy about the wedding," Bernadette whispered through her tears, the cruel irony of Olivia's murder just 2 weeks before her planned nuptials, adding another layer of tragedy to the already devastating loss. The revelation that would prove crucial to the case emerged through Bernadette's grief when she mentioned she had a special key made for him, with their wedding date engraved on it. She was going to give it to him last night. The key recovered from Liam's truck was rushed to the forensic lab, where technician Chen compared it to the lock mechanism from the cellar door. The wear patterns match, she confirmed to Adams after several hours of examination, and there's evidence this key was recently used in that specific lock. More damning still was Chen's discovery under microscopic examination, a partial fingerprint preserved in what appeared to be dried blood in one of the key's deeper grooves. The biological material was carefully collected for DNA analysis, while the partial print was sent for comparison against both Olivia's and Liam's known fingerprints. The duplicate key, apparently created without the knowledge of vineyard management and hidden in Liam's personal vehicle, was quickly becoming the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. As evening fell on October 13th, just over 24 hours after Olivia's murder, Liam McCaffrey was formally charged with first-degree murder. The charging documents detailed the preliminary evidence, his presence at the crime scene during the estimated time of death despite his claims to the contrary, his suspicious cleaning activities discovered by Detective Adams, the hidden duplicate key found in his possession, and the locked cellar door that only someone with a key could have secured after Olivia entered. The defendant having exclusive access to the location where the victim was found, deliberately trapped and killed her, then attempted to conceal his actions through deception and destruction of evidence, the prosecutor's statement read, laying the groundwork for what would become one of Kansas City's most closely watched murder trials in decades. Phase 3. The financial investigation into Liam McCaffrey's affairs began the day after his arrest, when Detective Adams obtained warrants for both his personal and business accounts. What emerged painted a picture of a man living far beyond his means, with credit card debt exceeding $127,000 spread across 7 different cards, monthly payments on a luxury apartment he could not afford, and a pattern of increasingly desperate financial maneuvers. The most damning discovery came from the winery's accounting records, where forensic accountant Trevor Michaels identified a sophisticated embezzlement scheme that had siphoned approximately $380,000 from McCaffrey Vineyards over the previous 18 months. He created vendor accounts for non-existent services, Michaels explained in his report, then routed the payments to shell accounts he controlled, using his position as deputy financial officer to approve the transactions himself. Olivia's laptop, recovered from her apartment, contained spreadsheets detailing the couple's wedding and honeymoon plans, including a budget document last modified 3 days before her murder. The file showed Olivia had discovered discrepancies in their joint accounts, including missing funds and unexplained withdrawals that Liam had attributed to business investments. Her browser history revealed searches for confronting partner about financial lies and protecting assets before marriage, suggesting she had begun to uncover Liam's deception and was considering her options. Most telling was a calendar entry scheduled for the evening of October 12th. Family dinner, important announcement, which aligned with what the prosecution would later argue was Olivia's plan to reveal both her pregnancy and Liam's financial misconduct to both families that night, a revelation he could not allow to happen. The life insurance policy discovery sent shockwaves through both families and provided prosecutors with another compelling piece of evidence pointing to premeditation. 6 months before Olivia's death, Liam had taken out a $2.1 million policy on his fiancée, listing himself as the sole beneficiary and using his position at the family business to easily afford the substantial premiums. The timing is particularly suspicious, noted prosecutor Michael Davis during the preliminary hearing, as it coincides with the period when the embezzlement scheme began to accelerate. The insurance agent who sold the policy, Catherine Winters, testified that Liam had specifically inquired about the contestability period and whether investigations were standard procedure for claims, questions that seemed innocent at the time but took on a sinister cast in light of subsequent events. Robert McCaffrey, still reeling from the dual shock of his future daughter-in-law's murder and his son's arrest, cooperated fully with investigators as they combed through the winery's financial records. His stunned disbelief turned to anger as the extent of Liam's embezzlement became clear, revealing a betrayal that extended far beyond the financial damage to the family business. "I trusted him completely with our accounts," Robert told Detective Adams during a follow-up interview, his voice hollow with grief and betrayal. The investigation revealed that Liam had used his father's digital signature to authorize transfers, taking advantage of Robert's trust and focus on the production side of the business to systematically drain funds while maintaining the appearance of normal operations. The forensic analysis of the key found in Liam's truck provided the prosecution with what Davis would later call the murder weapon that locked the trap. Technician Chen's meticulous examination revealed not just blood in the grooves, later confirmed through DNA analysis to be Olivia's, but also microscopic traces of a unique wine blend. The 2019 Cabernet Reserve blend, found on this key, is only produced in that specific cellar, vineyard manager Travis McCaffrey confirmed in his statement to police, inadvertently helping to build the case against his brother. The significance of this finding became clear when matched with Liam's claim that he hadn't entered the blending cellar on October 12th, a statement directly contradicted by the presence of that specific wine compound on the key he had hidden. Detectives pieced together the timeline of the murder through cell phone records, security footage from neighboring properties, and witness statements from winery employees. Barrel worker Miguel Sanchez provided crucial testimony, stating he had seen Liam re-entering the blending cellar at 5:47 p.m., nearly 2 hours after Liam told police he'd gone home. "He seemed angry, walking very fast, and he didn't acknowledge me like he usually does," Sanchez told investigators, adding that he had heard what sounded like an argument coming from the cellar earlier, but had thought nothing of it at the time. Cell tower data placed Liam's phone at the winery until 7:23 p.m., directly contradicting his alibi and placing him at the scene during the medical examiner's estimated time of death. The autopsy report delivered by Dr. Park on October 17th added the final, devastating component to the prosecution's theory of motive. The victim was approximately 4 weeks pregnant at time of death, the report stated clinically, a detail that transformed the understanding of the case for investigators. Olivia's sister, Chloe, speaking through tears during her interview with Adams, confirmed that Olivia had shared the news of her pregnancy with her just days before the murder. She was going to announce it to both families at dinner that week, Chloe explained, unaware that she was confirming the important announcement noted in Olivia's calendar. The pregnancy provided what prosecutors viewed as the final trigger, not just financial exposure, but the permanent connection of a child that would bind Liam to his responsibilities even if the relationship ended. As the investigation deepened, a disturbing pattern of controlling behavior emerged from interviews with Olivia's friends and co-workers. He always needed to know where she was, who she was with, her colleague Sarah Martinez told detectives, describing how Liam would call repeatedly when Olivia worked late at her marketing firm. Jennifer Kwan, Olivia's best friend, revealed that Olivia had confided about Liam's increasing paranoia in the weeks before her death. He accused her of secretly planning to leave him, which wasn't true, Kwan stated. She was committed to making the relationship work, but she was worried about his financial secrets and mood swings. These revelations painted a picture of a relationship deteriorating under the weight of Liam's deception and Olivia's growing awareness of his true character, creating what the prosecution would term a pressure cooker situation. that Liam McCaffrey chose to solve through murder rather than honesty. On October 25th, as the prosecution prepared to present their case to the grand jury, Detective Adams made the discovery that would reveal Liam's attempt to frame his father. While reviewing security footage obtained from a camera at the neighboring vineyard, footage that partially captured the McCaffrey parking lot, Adams noticed Liam making an unusual detour to his father's office building around 8:15 p.m. on the night of the murder. A subsequent search of Robert McCaffrey's office revealed Olivia's phone hidden in his desk drawer, carefully placed between folders in a manner suggesting it had been deliberately planted. The attempt to redirect suspicion to his father demonstrates both consciousness of guilt and premeditation, Prosecutor Davis noted when the grand jury returned their indictment, adding first-degree murder with special circumstances that would later allow the prosecution to seek the death penalty. Phase 4, the failed frame-up of Robert McCaffrey, became the prosecution's powerful evidence of Liam's calculated planning and consciousness of guilt. Digital forensics expert Tamara Wilson testified during the preliminary hearing that Olivia's phone, discovered in Robert's desk drawer, had been wiped of fingerprints but contained traces of Liam's DNA on the case. The phone was turned off at 6:12 p.m. on October 12th, shortly after the estimated time of death, Wilson explained to the court, noting that the device's last recorded location was the winery's blending cellar. The placement of the phone in Robert's office, a private space only family members could access without supervision, suggested an intimate knowledge of the building's layout and security protocols, further implicating Liam rather than an outside intruder. Robert McCaffrey's alibi proved unassailable, crushing Liam's apparent attempt to cast suspicion on his father, email records, video conference logs, and testimony. From 4 colleagues confirmed that Robert had been in a virtual meeting with international distributors from 5:30 p.m. until 7:45 p.m. on October 12th, making it impossible for him to have been involved in Olivia's murder. "I was discussing export regulations with our Japanese partners," Robert testified, his voice breaking as he realized the significance of establishing this alibi against his own son. The meeting had been recorded as standard practice for international business discussions, providing irrefutable timestamp evidence of Robert's presence at his home office throughout the critical time period when Olivia was killed. The prosecution constructed a timeline that methodically dismantled every aspect of Liam's original story to police. Security footage from neighboring businesses showed Olivia's car arriving at the winery at 5:02 p.m., contradicting Liam's claim that she had never visited that evening. Cell tower data placed Liam's phone at the winery continuously from 4:18 p.m. until 7:23 p.m., directly refuting his statement that he had left at 4:00 p.m. to go home. Most damaging was the testimony of Miguel Sanchez, who described seeing Liam entering the blending cellar at 5:47 p.m., looking agitated and in a hurry, then emerging approximately 20 minutes later and heading directly to the fermentation room, where he began cleaning with chemicals normally stored in a separate maintenance area. The defense strategy began to take shape during pre-trial motions, with Attorney Porter attempting to suppress the evidence of the duplicate key on grounds of illegal search. "My client had a reasonable expectation of privacy in a locked compartment of his vehicle," Porter argued before Judge Helena Kavanaugh, who would later preside over the trial. The motion was decisively rejected, with Judge Kavanaugh ruling that the search warrant had specifically included vehicles registered to the defendant and any containers therein. The discovery of the hidden key compartment falls well within the scope of the lawfully obtained warrant, she stated, allowing the prosecution to retain what would become their central piece of physical evidence linking Liam directly to the crime. Liam's bail hearing on November 8, 2022, provided the first public glimpse of the fracturing McCaffrey family dynamics. Robert and Evelyn McCaffrey attended but sat separately, their body language suggesting a deep divide in how they were processing their son's alleged crimes. While Evelyn clutched a rosary and maintained eye contact with Liam throughout the proceedings, Robert sat rigidly beside his other son, Travis, his gaze never once meeting Liam's. The Holloway family filled an entire row of the courtroom, their collective grief a palpable force as Prosecutor Davis argued successfully against bail, citing the severity of the charges, the substantial evidence of premeditation, and Liam's considerable financial resources making him a flight risk. The defendant has already demonstrated a willingness to manipulate evidence and deceive investigators, Davis told the court, and should remain in custody until trial. The investigation continued to uncover damning evidence even as pre-trial motions proceeded, with financial forensics revealing the increasingly desperate state of Liam's finances in the weeks leading up to the murder. Subpoenaed bank records showed he had maxed out 3 additional credit cards in September, attempted to secure a high-interest loan using the winery's assets as unauthorized collateral, and made inquiries about liquidating his retirement accounts despite substantial penalties. The defendant was financially drowning, Davis noted in a filing responding to the defense's motion to exclude financial evidence, and saw his fiancée's life insurance policy as a life raft. The court agreed with the prosecution that the financial evidence established a clear motive and ruled it admissible, dealing another significant blow to Liam's defense. December 3, 2022, the case took an unexpected turn when Detective Adams interviewed Olivia's former college roommate, Jessica Tran, who had been traveling abroad during the initial investigation. Tran revealed that Olivia had called her just days before the murder, confiding her discovery of Liam's financial deception and her pregnancy. She told me she had consulted a lawyer about protecting her assets, but not because she was leaving him, Tran recalled. She wanted to use it as leverage to get him help. This testimony led investigators to attorney Caroline Weber, with whom Olivia had met on October 9th, just 3 days before her death. Weber initially declined to discuss the meeting, citing attorney-client privilege, but when Prosecutor Davis obtained a court order finding that the privilege did not survive Olivia's death in these circumstances, Weber's notes revealed a crucial missing piece of the puzzle. Attorney Weber's files, subpoenaed in January 2023, contained detailed notes from her consultation with Olivia, including documentation of the embezzlement Olivia had discovered while managing their wedding finances. Client seeking prenuptial agreement to protect personal assets while supporting partner through financial rehabilitation, Weber had written, directly contradicting the narrative Liam had begun to construct through his attorneys that Olivia had been vindictively threatening to expose him. Instead, the notes revealed Olivia's compassion. She had planned to use the prenuptial agreement as leverage to force Liam into financial counseling and addiction treatment, believing his spending and deception stemmed from deeper issues she wanted to help him address. Client pregnant, concerned about creating stable environment for child, but committed to relationship if partner accepts help, read another entry, providing devastating context to Olivia's final days. The most bizarre twist in the pretrial investigation came in February 2023, when a routine jail cell search uncovered a hand-drawn map of the Kansas City International Airport in Liam's possession, with notations about security camera placements and staff rotations. Further investigation revealed he had been in contact with a former college acquaintance now working as a private pilot, making inquiries about charter flights to non-extradition countries. This discovery prompted increased security measures during Liam's court appearances and added charges of attempted escape to the already substantial case against him. The defendant's actions continued to demonstrate his unwillingness to face the consequences of his crimes, Davis told reporters after filing the additional charges, and his ongoing determination to evade justice by any means necessary. As the trial date approached, the final piece of physical evidence emerged from further forensic analysis of the blending cellar. Crime scene technicians conducting additional luminol testing on the cellar floor discovered blood evidence that had seeped between the stones in an area Liam had apparently attempted to clean. The blood spatter pattern indicates the victim was struck from behind with considerable force. Forensic analyst Marissa Chen testified during a pretrial hearing, consistent with someone seated at the tasting table being attacked unexpectedly. This evidence aligned perfectly with the prosecution's theory that Liam had invited Olivia to the cellar under the pretense of a pre-wedding wine tasting, only to attack her when her back was turned, a cowardly act that further undermined any possibility of the defense arguing for a crime of passion or self-defense. Phase 5. The Kansas City courthouse stood imposing against the clear blue sky on the morning of September 11th, 2023, as the trial of Missouri v. McCaffrey officially began, drawing media attention from across the country. Reporters clustered on the granite steps, their cameras trained on the separate arrivals of the Holloway family, unified in their grief, dressed in somber colors, with Bernadette clutching a photo of Olivia, and the fractured McCaffrey family, with Robert and Travis entering together while Evelyn arrived separately, her face partially hidden behind large sunglasses. Inside courtroom 4B, Judge Helena Kavanaugh's chambers had been prepared for what was expected to be a 6-week trial, with extra security measures in place following Liam's attempted escape planning and the intense public interest in the case. The defendant entered wearing a navy blue suit that hung slightly loose on his frame after 10 months in pretrial detention, his expression carefully neutral as he surveyed the packed gallery, his eyes momentarily meeting his mother's before focusing straight ahead. Prosecutor Michael Davis rose for his opening statement, his tall frame and measured pace commanding the courtroom's attention as he approached the jury. "This is a case about betrayal in its most fundamental form," he began, his voice resonating clearly through the hushed room. "The betrayal of trust, of love, of family, and ultimately of life itself." Davis methodically outlined the prosecution's narrative, how Liam McCaffrey had systematically embezzled from his family's business, taken out a life insurance policy on his fiancée, then murdered her when she discovered his deception and planned to address it in a way that would have exposed him to his family. He walked the jury through the timeline of October 12, 2022, using a large digital display to show security footage, cell phone data, and witness testimony that placed Liam at the winery during the time of Olivia's murder, directly contradicting his statements to police. "And at the center of this case," Davis said, holding up an evidence bag containing the brass key, "is this key, a key that was meant to be a wedding gift, but instead became the instrument of imprisonment that sealed Olivia Holloway's fate." Defense attorney Winston Porter's opening statement presented an alternative narrative, suggesting that Olivia's death was a tragic accident compounded by Liam's panic and poor decisions afterward. "My client made terrible mistakes in the aftermath of finding his fiancée's body," Porter acknowledged, attempting to get ahead of the damning evidence of Liam's cleanup efforts and contradictory statements. Porter painted Liam as a man who discovered his fiancée already dead in the cellar, perhaps from a fall against the blending table during a medical episode, and who, fearing he would be blamed due to their recent arguments about finances, made the catastrophic decision to attempt to cover up her death rather than report it immediately. Fear, not guilt, drove his actions that night, Porter insisted to the skeptical-looking jury, setting up their defense strategy of admitting to the financial crimes and subsequent cover-up attempt while denying the murder itself. Bernadette Holloway was the prosecution's first witness, her testimony so powerful that several jurors visibly struggled to maintain their composure as she spoke. Olivia was so excited about the wedding, she testified, her voice occasionally breaking, but her resolve evident as she described her daughter's happiness in the weeks before her death. Davis gently guided her testimony toward the brass key that had become central to the case, producing a photograph of a nearly identical key. "Is this similar to the key you helped your daughter obtain?" he asked, and Bernadette nodded, explaining how Olivia had wanted to surprise Liam with a specially engraved key to the blending cellar as a wedding gift. She had their wedding date engraved on it, October 29, 2022, Bernadette said, her voice catching as she added, she thought it would be romantic that they could open special bottles there on their anniversaries in the future. The emotional climax of Bernadette's testimony came when Davis presented the actual key found in Liam's truck, now sealed in an evidence bag. "Mrs. Holloway, do you recognize the engraving on this key?" he asked gently, and the courtroom fell completely silent as Bernadette studied it through her tears. "That's it," she finally whispered. "That's the engraving I helped her choose. L&O, Forever Begins 10/29/22. As Bernadette identified the key, she suddenly looked directly at Liam for the first time since entering the courtroom, her grief momentarily transforming into anger as she said clearly for the record, she was giving him a gift of their future, and he used it to lock her in that cellar to die. Defense attorney Porter immediately objected to the characterization, but the impact on the jury was unmistakable, as Judge Kavanaugh sustained the objection and instructed them to disregard the comment, an instruction that several trial observers later noted seemed impossible to follow, given the raw emotion of the moment. Detective Daniel Adams took the stand on the trial's second day, providing a methodical account of the investigation from the moment he arrived at McCaffrey Vineyards to find Liam scrubbing the fermentation room floor. Adams, with over 20 years of homicide investigation experience, proved an unflappable witness as he described the inconsistencies in Liam's statements, the discovery of blood evidence despite cleaning attempts, and ultimately the recovery of Olivia's body from the locked cellar. "The defendant told me repeatedly that only 2 keys existed for that door, one in his possession and one in his father's," Adams testified, his steady gaze occasionally moving between the jury and the defendant. "Yet we found a 3rd key, hidden in a secret compartment in his truck toolbox, with the victim's blood in its grooves and evidence it had been used in that lock." Porter's cross-examination of Adams focused on potential investigative blind spots, attempting to suggest that officers had fixated on Liam from the beginning without adequately exploring other possibilities. "Did you investigate whether anyone else might have had access to the cellar?" Porter pressed, to which Adams calmly replied that they had interviewed every employee and regular visitor to the winery. "And isn't it true that the winery hosts events where numerous outsiders have access to the property?" Porter continued, trying to introduce doubt about security. Adams acknowledged the events but noted that the blending cellar remained strictly off-limits to the public and was secured by a sophisticated lock that showed no signs of forced entry. "The only way into that room was with a key," Adams stated firmly, "and the only keys we could account for were the one in Mr. McCaffrey's pocket when I met him, the one in his father's possession that never left his home that day according to verified testimony, and the hidden duplicate found in the defendant's truck with the victim's blood on it." The prosecution's case built methodical momentum as they called Miguel Sanchez, the barrel worker, who had seen Liam re-entering the blending cellar at 5:47 p.m. Sanchez, initially nervous on the stand, gained confidence as Davis guided him through his recollection of that evening. "I was moving barrels in the main storage area when I saw Mr. Liam walking very fast toward the cellar door," he testified, in slightly accented English. "He didn't say hello like normal, just unlocked the door and went inside." Sanchez further testified that approximately 20 minutes later, he observed Liam emerging from the cellar looking different, like, I don't know how to say it, but like someone who has seen something bad. This testimony directly contradicted Liam's statement to police that he had not entered the cellar at all that evening and had left the winery at 4:00 p.m., a discrepancy the prosecution highlighted by displaying Liam's videotaped police interview alongside Sanchez's testimony. Dr. Eleanor Park's testimony about the autopsy findings silenced the courtroom with its clinical detail and emotional weight. Using anatomical diagrams rather than the actual autopsy photos out of respect for the Holloway family, Dr. Park walked the jury through Olivia's injuries, the fatal blunt force trauma to the back of her head consistent with impact against the corner of the oak blending table, defensive wounds on her forearms indicating she had tried to protect herself during an attack, and bruising around her wrists suggesting she had been restrained at some point during the assault. Based on the pattern of injuries and blood evidence at the scene, Dr. Park testified, the victim was likely seated when initially struck from behind, then engaged in a struggle with her attacker before succumbing to her injuries. When Davis asked about toxicology findings, Dr. Park confirmed that Olivia had consumed only a small amount of wine, contradicting any potential defense suggestion that intoxication might have contributed to an accidental fall. The revelation of Olivia's pregnancy in open court, though anticipated by those familiar with the case, still sent a ripple of shock through the gallery. The victim was approximately 4 weeks pregnant at the time of death, Dr. Park stated in response to Davis's direct question, her professional demeanor momentarily softening as she acknowledged the additional life lost. From the gallery, a sob escaped Bernadette Holloway, while Marcus placed his arm protectively around his wife's shoulders, his own face rigid with grief. The prosecution had strategically waited until this moment to introduce this evidence, understanding its emotional impact would be profound on both the jury and the public perception of the case. Davis asked Dr. Park if Olivia would have been aware of her pregnancy, and the medical examiner confirmed that home pregnancy tests found in Olivia's apartment bathroom trash suggested she had recently confirmed it herself. As the first week of trial concluded, the prosecution called forensic accountant Trevor Michaels to establish the financial motive underlying the murder. Michaels methodically detailed the embezzlement scheme Liam had orchestrated, creating a visual presentation that tracked the movement of funds from McCaffrey Vineyards through shell companies and finally to Liam's personal accounts. The defendant diverted approximately $380,000 over 18 months, Michaels testified, displaying charts showing the acceleration of the embezzlement in the months leading up to the murder. He also detailed Liam's personal financial crisis, maxed-out credit cards, failed investment schemes, and mounting luxury expenditures, including a planned honeymoon to Bora Bora that far exceeded what the couple could legitimately afford. By October 2022, Mr. McCaffrey was essentially insolvent, Michaels concluded, with no legal means to continue his lifestyle or repay the embezzled funds if discovered. The prosecution's strategic presentation of evidence was building what media commentators called an airtight case, with each witness adding another layer to the narrative of financial desperation, discovery, and deadly response. Yet it was the testimony scheduled for the following week, that of insurance agent Catherine Winters regarding the life insurance policy and attorney Carolyn Weber about Olivia's prenuptial agreement consultation that promised to complete the picture of Liam's motive and premeditation. As court adjourned for the weekend, journalists noted the telling detail that while the Holloway family left together, supporting one another through their shared grief, the McCaffrey family departed separately and without interaction, Robert and Travis exiting through a side door while Evelyn remained seated long after the courtroom had cleared, her expression unreadable as she watched her son being led back to custody. Phase 6. The prosecution's forensic evidence presentation began the second week of trial with Marissa Chen, the lead crime scene technician, who provided the jury with a comprehensive analysis of the brass key that had become the centerpiece of their case. The key recovered from the defendant's truck contains 3 distinct types of evidence linking it to the crime, Chen testified, using a digital microscope display that allowed the jury to see the magnified details she described. First, she pointed out the microscopic serration patterns that perfectly matched the lock mechanism from the cellar door, confirming this specific key had been used in that lock. Second, she identified blood residue in the key's grooves that DNA analysis had confirmed as Olivia Holloway's, placing the key in contact with the victim around the time of her death. Finally, and most damning, Chen highlighted trace evidence of a rare wine compound found on the key, a distinctive chemical signature from the 2019 Cabernet Reserve blend that had been bottled exclusively in the private blending cellar that same afternoon. The wine evidence proved particularly significant as it tied directly to Liam's timeline deception. This specific wine compound is unique to bottles processed in the blending cellar after 5:30 p.m. on October 12th, testified Travis McCaffrey, Liam's brother and the winery's production manager, visibly uncomfortable but determined to provide accurate information. Travis explained that he had overseen a special bottling session of their limited reserve blend that afternoon, which ended at 5:25 p.m., after which the fresh bottles were left in the cellar to settle before labeling. That specific chemical marker would only be present if someone handled those bottles after the bottling process was complete, Travis stated, inadvertently providing scientific proof that Liam had entered the cellar after 5:30 p.m., directly contradicting his claim of having left the winery at 4 p.m. Chemical analyst Dr. Sophia Wilson provided expert testimony on the wine compound evidence, explaining to the jury how the proprietary blend created a unique chemical signature. Each vineyard's soil, grape variety, barrel type, and aging process creates a distinctive profile that can be identified through spectrographic analysis, Dr. Wilson explained, displaying comparative charts of the compound found on the key and samples taken from the cellar bottles. She then demonstrated how this evidence completely undermined Liam's claim that he hadn't entered the cellar that day. The compound identified on the key is specifically from the bottles that were processed that afternoon, Wilson testified, and could not have been present on the key unless it came into contact with those bottles after 5:30 p.m. on October 12th, the time when Mr. McCaffrey claimed to have already left the premises. The prosecution's meticulous attention to forensic detail continued with blood spatter analyst James Rodriguez, who used 3D modeling to reconstruct the attack in the cellar. Based on the blood, evidence patterns on the walls, floor, and furniture, we can determine that the victim was initially struck while seated at the tasting table, Rodriguez demonstrated, using the digital model to show how the first blow likely occurred. The reconstruction showed a sequence of events supporting the prosecution's narrative: an initial attack from behind, followed by Olivia's desperate attempt to escape, a struggle near the wine racks, and finally the fatal impact against the corner of the blending table. The blood evidence tells the story of someone being assaulted, not someone who accidentally fell, Rodriguez concluded, systematically dismantling the defense's accident theory. The defense attempted to challenge the forensic evidence through cross-examination, with Porter questioning whether contamination might have occurred during evidence collection. Isn't it possible that the key was contaminated with the wine compound during police handling? He asked Chen, who firmly rejected the suggestion, explaining the strict chain of custody protocols that had been followed. The key was photographed in situ, collected using sterile forceps, immediately sealed in an evidence bag, and transported directly to the lab, she testified, adding that all personnel handling evidence wore appropriate protective gear and followed anti-contamination procedures. Chen further noted that the pattern of the wine compound in the key's grooves was consistent with direct insertion into the lock, not with secondary transfer during evidence handling. Porter's cross-examination strategy shifted to challenging the uniqueness of the wine compound, asking Dr. Wilson whether similar compounds might be found in other wines. While similar compounds exist in other Cabernet blends, the specific chemical markers from the McCaffrey 2019 reserve have a unique signature based on their proprietary blend and barrel aging process, Wilson responded, maintaining her scientific authority despite Porter's persistent questioning. When Porter suggested the compound might have transferred to the key on a previous occasion, Wilson countered by noting the compound's instability outside of proper storage conditions. This specific marker begins to degrade within 48 to 72 hours of exposure to air and light, she explained, which means the transfer to the key must have been recent, consistent with the timeline of the murder. The prosecution strengthened their forensic case by calling digital forensics expert Tamara Wilson, who presented evidence from Olivia's and Liam's cell phones. Ms. Holloway's phone last connected to the cellar's Wi-Fi at 5:38 p.m. before being powered off, Wilson testified, displaying the connection logs that placed Olivia in the cellar at that specific time. She then presented data from Liam's phone showing it connected to the same Wi-Fi network at 5:49 p.m., corroborating Miguel Sanchez's testimony about seeing Liam enter the cellar around that time. Most damning was Wilson's analysis of Liam's search history in the days leading up to the murder, which included queries about undetectable poisons, accidents that look natural, and how long before life insurance pays out after death. Searches the defendant had attempted to delete, but which Wilson's team had recovered from the phone's cache. The testimony of Catherine Winters, the insurance agent who sold Liam the $2.1 million policy on Olivia's life, provided compelling evidence of premeditation. Mr. McCaffrey contacted me in April 2022, approximately 6 months before Ms. Holloway's death, inquiring specifically about high-value policies for his fiancée, Winters testified. She described how Liam had asked detailed questions about the contestability period, the time during which insurance companies can investigate claims for fraud, and whether autopsies were standard procedure for all claims. He seemed particularly interested in whether the company would investigate claims that appeared to be accidents, Winters recalled, noting that while such questions weren't unheard of, Liam's persistent focus on these aspects had struck her as unusual, though not suspicious enough at the time to decline the application. Defense attorney Porter attempted to normalize Liam's insurance inquiries during cross-examination, suggesting that, as a financial professional, he was simply being thorough. Isn't it common for people in the financial industry to ask detailed questions about policy terms? He asked Winters, who acknowledged that some clients were more detail-oriented than others. Porter then introduced evidence that Liam had also purchased a policy on himself naming Olivia as the beneficiary, suggesting this indicated mutual financial planning rather than sinister intent. However, on redirect examination, Davis quickly established that Liam's self-policy was for only $500,000, less than a quarter of Olivia's coverage, and had been purchased months earlier as part of a standard benefits package through the winery, significantly undermining Porter's attempted equivalence. The prosecution's forensic case culminated with Dr. Eleanor Park returning to the stand to address the defense's accident theory directly. Using anatomical models and injury pattern analysis, Dr. Park methodically demonstrated why Olivia's injuries were inconsistent with an accidental fall. The primary injury was to the back of the head, with the impact pattern indicating significant force beyond what would typically occur in a fall, she explained, pointing to the models. Additionally, the defensive wounds on the forearms and the bruising patterns on the wrists show active resistance and restraint, neither of which would be present in an accidental injury scenario. When Porter challenged whether intoxication might have contributed to an accidental fall, Dr. Park referred to the toxicology report showing minimal alcohol in Olivia's system, approximately equivalent to less than 1 glass of wine, well below any level that would impair coordination or balance. As the forensic evidence phase neared completion, the prosecution called Robert McCaffrey to testify about the discovery of Olivia's phone in his office desk, the attempted frame-up that had backfired so spectacularly on Liam. "I had no knowledge of that phone being in my desk until the police discovered it during their search," Robert testified, his voice steady but his expression pained as he gave evidence against his own son. He confirmed that his office remained locked when he wasn't present, with only family members having access to the keys. Robert then provided ironclad verification of his whereabouts during the time of the murder, with Davis playing a portion of the recorded video conference showing Robert clearly visible in his home office from 5:30 p.m. until 7:45 p.m. on October 12th. "I was at my home conducting business with our international partners during the entire time frame when Olivia was killed," he stated, the video evidence making it impossible for him to have been involved in either the murder or the subsequent hiding of evidence. Phase 7. The courtroom fell to a hush as Dr. Eleanor Park returned to the witness stand to provide detailed testimony about Olivia Holloway's pregnancy. Based on hormone levels and embryonic development, the victim was approximately 4 weeks pregnant at the time of death, Dr. Park testified, her clinical precision doing little to soften the emotional impact of her words on the assembled families. Prosecutor Davis approached this testimony carefully, establishing through Dr. Park that at 4 weeks, Olivia would likely have only recently confirmed the pregnancy through home testing. Would this timing align with the pregnancy tests found in Ms. Holloway's apartment? Davis asked, to which Dr. Park affirmed it would be consistent with someone who had recently discovered their pregnancy and was still in the early stages of processing the news. The revelation of the pregnancy provided the prosecution with a powerful additional motive element, which Davis developed through Chloe Holloway's subsequent testimony about her sister's state of mind in her final days. "Olivia called me on October 10th, 2 days before she was killed," Chloe testified, fighting back tears as she recalled their last conversation. She was excited about the baby, but worried about Liam's reaction, given the financial problems she'd discovered. Chloe described how her sister had confided that she planned to tell Liam about the pregnancy on the morning of October 12th, then announce it to both families that evening at a dinner she was organizing. "She told me, I'm going to force his hand with the pregnancy. He needs to come clean about the money before we bring a child into this," Chloe recalled, providing the jury with insight into Olivia's mindset and actions on her final day. Text messages recovered from Olivia's phone corroborated Chloe's testimony, with Davis displaying several exchanges between the sisters discussing the pregnancy and Olivia's concerns about Liam's financial deceptions. "I told him this morning about the baby," read one message sent from Olivia to Chloe at 10:27 a.m. on October 12th. "His reaction was strange, not happy, not sad, just kind of blank. Said he needed time to process. I'm still planning to announce to everyone tonight. This secrecy has to end." Another message, sent just after noon, read, "He's acting weird after the baby news. Said he needs to take care of some things at the winery before dinner. I'm heading there after work to make sure he's okay, and to see the special wine he wants to serve tonight." Maybe the baby news just shocked him. The testimony about Olivia's pregnancy visibly affected several jurors, with 2 openly wiping away tears as Chloe described her sister's excitement about becoming a mother. Davis carefully established through these witnesses that the pregnancy represented not just a personal development, but a significant complication to Liam's apparent plan to escape his financial deceptions through Olivia's death. The baby would have created a permanent connection, Davis noted during questioning, regardless of whether the relationship ended. The permanent nature of parenthood, combined with Olivia's intention to announce the pregnancy to both families that evening, established a clear now or never moment for Liam, a final trigger making October 12th the last possible day to act before his financial crimes were exposed. The most dramatic moment of the trial's third week came unexpectedly during the testimony of Travis McCaffrey, Liam's brother, who was called to provide context about the winery's operations and the nature of the blending cellar where Olivia was killed. Travis had maintained a stoic demeanor through his technical testimony about wine production and cellar access, but when Davis showed him the photograph of the engraved key found in Liam's truck, his composure cracked. "Olivia showed me the engraving design a week before," Travis said, his voice suddenly unsteady. "She wanted my opinion on whether Liam would like it." As Travis continued describing how Olivia had been excited about giving Liam this personalized gift, Evelyn McCaffrey, who had been sitting silently in the gallery throughout the trial, suddenly stood up. "You killed my grandbaby," Evelyn cried out, pointing at Liam, her voice cracking with emotion that seemed to surprise even her. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs as Judge Kavanaugh immediately called for order, but Evelyn continued, "Your own child, Liam. How could you?" Before security personnel gently escorted her from the courtroom. The outburst, coming from Liam's own mother, who had previously appeared supportive, sent visible shockwaves through the jury box. Judge Kavanaugh called an immediate recess, instructing the jury to disregard the outburst, though several trial observers noted the impossibility of unhearing such a raw, emotional moment from a family member who had, until that point, seemed to stand by the defendant. When court reconvened after the recess, the prosecution called Jessica Tran, Olivia's former college roommate, who had spoken with Olivia by phone just days before the murder. "She called me from her car after leaving the lawyer's office on October 9th, Tran testified, explaining that Olivia had sought her advice as one of her oldest friends. "She told me she had discovered Liam had been stealing money from the winery and had consulted an attorney about a prenuptial agreement to protect her assets." Tran's testimony directly challenged the defense narrative that Olivia had been planning to publicly humiliate Liam by exposing his crimes. "She specifically told me, 'I'm not trying to ruin him, I just need leverage to get him help,'" Tran recalled. "She thought he had some kind of addiction or problem that was driving the behavior, and she wanted to address it privately as a couple before the wedding." The prosecution's theory of Liam's mindset on October 12th was further developed through the testimony of Sarah Martinez, Olivia's co-worker who had spoken with her just hours before her death. Olivia mentioned she had told Liam about the pregnancy that morning and was going to meet him at the winery before their family dinner, Martinez recalled. She described Olivia as determined but not vindictive, focused on resolving the situation for the sake of their child. She said something like, "With a baby coming, there's no more time for secrets. Tonight everything gets put on the table," Martinez testified, unwittingly echoing the prosecution's timeline that Liam had recognized this as his final opportunity to prevent exposure of his crimes. Martinez also noted that Olivia had seemed concerned about Liam's reaction to the pregnancy news, describing him as oddly distant rather than sharing in her excitement. The courtroom atmosphere grew increasingly tense as the prosecution called Jennifer Kwan, Olivia's best friend, who provided insight into Liam's controlling behavior in the weeks before the murder. Liam had become obsessed with Olivia's whereabouts and who she was meeting, Kwan testified, describing incidents where he had shown up unexpectedly at Olivia's workplace or repeatedly called when she was out with friends. Kwan revealed that Olivia had confided her concerns about these behaviors, especially after discovering the financial discrepancies. "She told me he accused her of spying on him when she asked about some unusual transactions she found while planning their honeymoon, Xuan recalled. She wasn't spying. She was literally just trying to figure out their vacation budget, but he became defensive and paranoid, accusing her of not trusting him. Xuan's testimony painted a picture of escalating control and paranoia that directly contradicted the defense's portrayal of Liam as a loving fiancé who panicked after finding Olivia accidentally deceased. Davis carefully walked Xuan through several text exchanges with Olivia from the week before her death, including one particularly prescient message. "Sometimes I worry about how he'll react when he realizes I know everything. It's like he's two different people. The Liam I fell in love with and this secretive, angry person who emerges whenever I ask about money." Xuan also testified about helping Olivia research financial counseling options, supporting the prosecution's narrative that Olivia had been seeking to help Liam rather than expose him, making his violent response all the more tragic in its unnecessary nature. The testimony about Liam's controlling behavior was corroborated by digital forensic evidence presented by expert witness Aaron Cohen, who had analyzed data from both Olivia's and Liam's phones. "We found evidence that the defendant had installed tracking software on Ms. Holloway's phone approximately 3 weeks before her death," Cohen testified, displaying screenshots of the spyware and its activity logs. The program had recorded Olivia's locations, monitored her text messages, and even activated her microphone during certain calls, including, significantly, her call with attorney Carolyn Weber about the prenuptial agreement. Based on the access logs, the defendant checked this monitoring software 17 times on October 9th alone, the day Ms. Holloway visited the attorney, Cohen stated, establishing that Liam likely knew about Olivia's legal consultation despite her attempt to keep it private until she was ready to approach him constructively. The prosecution's case regarding the pregnancy motive culminated with the testimony of Dr. Rachel Winters, Olivia's obstetrician, who confirmed that Olivia had called her office on October 11th, the day before the murder, to schedule her first prenatal appointment. "Our records show Ms. Holloway called to confirm her home pregnancy test results and schedule care," Dr. Winters testified, having been released from patient confidentiality by court order given the circumstances. She verified that Olivia had been scheduled for an initial appointment the following week and had mentioned planning to bring her fiancé. "Our intake notes indicate she said they were both excited about the pregnancy," Dr. Winters stated, directly contradicting Liam's statement to police that he had been unaware of Olivia's pregnancy, another lie in his increasingly tangled web of deception. As the third week of trial concluded, the prosecution had methodically established multiple interlocking motives for Liam to have killed Olivia on that specific date. The embezzlement she had discovered, the life insurance policy he had taken out, her pregnancy announcement, and her plans to reveal all to both families that very evening. The timeline presented left the jury with a clear narrative. Liam, realizing that October 12th represented his last chance to prevent exposure of his crimes and facing the prospect of both financial ruin and unwanted parenthood, had lured Olivia to the winery's blending cellar under the pretense of selecting wine for their announcement dinner, then murdered her and attempted to cover his tracks with an increasingly desperate series of deceptions. As court adjourned for the weekend, legal analysts covering the trial noted the prosecution had built an exceptionally strong case through both forensic evidence and motive, leaving the defense with few viable options as they prepared to present their case the following week. Phase 8. Attorney Caroline Weber's testimony on day 15 of the trial delivered what many observers called the knockout blow to Liam McCaffrey's defense. Taking the stand with the composed professionalism that had characterized her 20-year legal career, Weber detailed her October 9th consultation with Olivia Holloway regarding a prenuptial agreement. "Ms. Holloway came to my office with detailed financial records documenting approximately $380,000 in funds that had been diverted from McCaffrey Vineyards to accounts she had traced to Mr. McCaffrey, Weber testified, referring to her meticulous notes that had been subpoenaed by the court. The attorney explained that Olivia had not been seeking to end the relationship or publicly expose Liam, contrary to the narrative the defense had attempted to establish. My client specifically stated that her goal was to use the prenuptial agreement as leverage to get Mr. McCaffrey into financial counseling and possibly addiction treatment, as she believed his behavior indicated deeper issues than simply financial misconduct. Weber's testimony included reading directly from her consultation notes, which Prosecutor Davis displayed on screens for the jury to follow. Client seeking protective financial arrangement while supporting partner through rehabilitation. Expressed concern about pattern of financial deception but commitment to relationship. Pregnancy mentioned as motivating factor for addressing issues promptly rather than postponing confrontation. The notes painted a picture of Olivia as compassionate rather than vindictive, seeking to address Liam's issues privately while protecting her own assets and their future child. Ms. Holloway told me, "I don't want to destroy him or his relationship with his family, but I can't build a life on lies, especially now with a baby coming," Weber recalled, her testimony directly contradicting the defense's characterization of Olivia as threatening or vindictive. The cross-examination of Attorney Weber by defense counsel Porter attempted to challenge the admissibility of the privileged communications, but Judge Kavanaugh had already ruled on this matter, finding that the attorney-client privilege did not survive in these specific circumstances. Porter then pivoted to questioning whether Olivia might have presented a different version of events to Weber than she intended to pursue with Liam. "Isn't it possible that what a client tells their attorney differs from what they might actually say to their partner?" Porter suggested, to which Weber responded with professional certainty. Ms. Holloway was unusually explicit about her intentions. She brought written talking points for her planned conversation with Mr. McCaffrey, which I reviewed during our consultation. Weber then revealed another damning detail. She intended to present him with both the evidence of the embezzlement and a path forward that included financial restitution to his family business over time, counseling for his issues, and a prenuptial agreement protecting her assets while they rebuilt trust. Liam McCaffrey took the stand in his own defense on day 17, a risky strategy that legal analysts suggested reflected the defense's desperate position after the prosecution's overwhelming case, dressed in a somber gray suit and, speaking in a carefully measured tone, Liam presented the jury with an alternative narrative of October 12th. "I did take money from the winery," he admitted, abandoning the previous denials as indefensible given the financial evidence. "And I was terrified of being exposed, but I did not kill Olivia." Liam claimed that he had met Olivia at the winery that evening as planned, and they had argued about the financial discrepancies she had discovered. "She told me she was pregnant, and that she was going to tell both our families everything that night if I didn't agree to her terms," he testified, attempting to support the defense's theory that he had felt cornered, and that Olivia had been threatening rather than supportive. The turning point in Liam's testimony came during Davis's cross-examination, which systematically dismantled his narrative by highlighting the contradictions between his current story and his initial statements to police. "You told Detective Adams you left the winery at 4:00 p.m. and never saw Olivia that day," Davis noted, displaying the video of Liam's police interview. "Now you're telling this jury you met her there and argued. Which version should they believe?" Liam's explanation that he had panicked and lied to police only opened the door for Davis to question what else he might be lying about now. The prosecutor methodically walked through each piece of physical evidence, the blood in the cellar, the hidden key with Olivia's blood, and the wine compound on it, the bleach-cleaned areas, asking how each could be explained if Liam's current version of events were true. With each question, Liam's responses became increasingly convoluted and implausible. The cross-examination reached its climax when Davis introduced the prenuptial attorney's notes, which directly contradicted Liam's characterization of Olivia's intentions. Ms. Weber's notes indicate that Olivia wanted to help you, not destroy you, Davis stated firmly. That she was seeking a path forward together, not threatening exposure. How do you explain this contradiction? Liam's composure finally cracked as he was confronted with Olivia's actual intentions, so at odds with the paranoid perception he had constructed. She must have been lying to the attorney, he attempted weakly, before adding, or maybe she changed her mind after that meeting. Davis pounced on this speculation, pointing out that every witness who had spoken with Olivia in her final days, her sister, her friends, her co-workers, had consistently described her plans to address the issues constructively for the sake of their child and relationship. The defendant's testimony took another devastating turn when Davis questioned him about the pregnancy. You testified that Olivia told you she was pregnant on October 12th, but phone records show she sent a text to her sister on October 10th, stating she had already told you about the baby. Were you lying then, or are you lying now? Liam's stammered response about not remembering exactly when he learned of the pregnancy undermined his credibility on a fundamental point. Davis continued this line of questioning, presenting evidence of Liam's internet searches about unwanted pregnancy and paternity testing from October 10th, searches that directly contradicted his claim of only learning about the pregnancy on the 12th. You knew about the baby for days before Olivia died, Davis asserted, and rather than being shocked by the news on the day of the murder, you had already been researching ways to address an unwanted pregnancy. Porter attempted damage control during redirect examination, guiding Liam through explanations for his contradictory statements and suspicious behaviors. Why did you clean the fermentation room floor with bleach if you weren't trying to hide evidence of murder? Porter asked, giving Liam an opportunity to offer an innocent explanation. We had a wine spill earlier that day, and I didn't want it to stain the concrete, Liam claimed, though this explanation contradicted his initial statement to police that he was getting ahead on harvest cleanup. When Porter asked about the hidden key found in his truck, Liam offered that he had made a duplicate for convenience without telling anyone, a claim that failed to address why Olivia's blood was found on it or why he had previously denied its existence. The defense called character witnesses in an attempt to humanize Liam, including former college professor Dr. Martin Reynolds, who described him as bright and ambitious during his business school years. Several friends testified about Liam's apparent devotion to Olivia, describing the couple as happy and excited about their upcoming wedding. However, during cross-examination, Davis established that none of these witnesses had interacted closely with Liam in the months leading up to the murder, when his financial deceptions and controlling behavior had escalated. One friend, under questioning, reluctantly acknowledged noticing changes in Liam's behavior in recent months, describing him as increasingly secretive and stressed, and noting that he had canceled several social engagements, citing winery emergencies that, in retrospect, seemed suspicious. Psychiatric expert Dr. Elaine Harrington testified for the defense, suggesting that Liam had experienced acute situational anxiety upon discovering Olivia's body, leading to poor decision-making in the aftermath. Panic can cause otherwise rational individuals to make highly irrational choices, including attempting to cover up a death they didn't cause, Dr. Harrington stated, attempting to provide an explanation for Liam's cleaning activities and contradictory statements that didn't involve actual guilt. However, during cross-examination, Davis established that Dr. Harrington had not reviewed the complete evidence in the case, including the forensic reports contradicting the possibility of an accidental death. Would your opinion change if you knew that the physical evidence shows Ms. Holloway was struck from behind while seated, And had defensive wounds indicating a struggle? Davis asked, to which Dr. Harrington was forced to concede that such evidence would be inconsistent with her theory of panic after discovering an accidental death. The defense case concluded with testimony from a private investigator hired by Porter's firm, who attempted to suggest alternative theories about who might have accessed the cellar. The investigator noted that several winery employees had been fired in the months preceding the murder and might have harbored resentment toward the McCaffrey family. However, this testimony fell apart during cross-examination when Davis established that none of these former employees could have possessed a key to the cellar, known about Olivia's planned visit that evening, or had any connection to the specific evidence found at the scene. And did any of these theoretical alternate suspects have a $2.1 million insurance policy on Ms. Holloway's life? Davis asked pointedly, to which the investigator could only respond in the negative. As the defense rested their case on day 21, legal observers noted the stark contrast between the prosecution's methodical, evidence-based narrative and the defense's fragmented attempts to create reasonable doubt. Liam's testimony, rather than humanizing him to the jury, had highlighted the contradictions in his various accounts and drawn attention to his apparent inability to directly address the most damning evidence. The prosecution's rebuttal witnesses, including a forensic psychologist who directly challenged Dr. Harrington's panic theory based on the evidence of premeditation and cover-up, further strengthened their case. As both sides prepared for closing arguments, the courthouse hallways buzzed with speculation not about whether Liam would be convicted, but whether the jury would recommend the death penalty that Prosecutor Davis had indicated the state would seek. Phase 9. Prosecutor Michael Davis rose for his closing argument on the morning of October 16, 2023, the 22nd day of trial, the courtroom packed beyond capacity with spectators and media. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice measured but resonant, "this case at its core is about choices." Davis walked deliberately to the evidence table and lifted the bagged brass key that had become the symbol of the entire case. This key was meant to be a gift of love, engraved with a date, October 29, 2022, that would never come. He held the key up, the overhead lights catching the metal, as he turned to face the jury directly. Instead, the defendant transformed this symbol of commitment into an instrument of imprisonment and death, using it to lock Olivia Holloway in that cellar after attacking her from behind. Davis methodically reconstructed the prosecution's case, using a digital timeline displayed on the courtroom screens to walk the jury through the evidence-supported narrative of October 12, 2022. The defendant's motive was threefold, he explained, ticking off each element on his fingers. First, financial desperation. He had embezzled $380,000 from his family's business and was on the verge of exposure. Second, a $2.1 million life insurance policy he had taken out on Olivia just 6 months earlier, which would solve his financial problems instantly if she died. And third, Olivia's pregnancy, a permanent connection that would bind him to his responsibilities even if their relationship ended. The prosecutor's methodical presentation reminded the jury of the testimonial and physical evidence supporting each element of motive, creating a compelling picture of Liam's mindset on the day of the murder. The timeline Davis presented highlighted what he called the point of no return, Olivia's plan to announce both her pregnancy and Liam's financial misconduct to both families at dinner on the evening of October 12th. The defendant knew this was his last chance to prevent exposure, Davis explained, displaying text messages from Olivia to her sister confirming her intentions for that evening. Olivia Holloway was not threatening him vindictively, as the defense has suggested. She was offering him a path to redemption, a chance to address his issues with support rather than punishment, But that path required honesty, responsibility, and accountability, qualities the defendant had abandoned in favor of deception, theft, and ultimately murder. Davis then walked the jury through the physical evidence, emphasizing the forensic significance of the brass key found hidden in Liam's truck. "This key tells the whole story," he stated, pointing to the enlarged images of the forensic analysis. "It has Olivia's blood in its grooves. It has microscopic scratches matching the cellar lock, and it has traces of a wine compound that could only have been present in that cellar after 5:30 p.m. on the day of the murder, a time when the defendant claimed to have already left the premises." The prosecutor reminded the jury of Miguel Sanchez's testimony about seeing Liam enter the cellar at 5:47 p.m., the cell phone data, placing both Olivia and Liam at the winery during the time of death, and the evidence of Liam's cleanup efforts discovered by Detective Adams later that night. "The defendant's own actions betray his consciousness of guilt," Davis continued, displaying side-by-side images of Liam cleaning the fermentation room floor and the blood evidence later revealed by forensic testing. "Innocent people who discover accidents don't scrub floors with bleach. They don't hide keys with blood on them in secret compartments in their vehicles. They don't plant victims' phones in their father's offices to redirect suspicion. And they certainly don't tell lie after lie after lie to investigators." Davis methodically listed each of Liam's contradictory statements, from his initial claim that Olivia had never arrived at the winery to his testimony on the stand that they had argued there, highlighting how each lie had been systematically disproven by witnesses, physical evidence, or digital data. Davis reserved his most powerful argument for the end of his closing, returning to the theme of Olivia's pregnancy and the life that had been taken alongside hers. "Two lives were ended in that cellar," he said softly, his tone shifting to one of profound sadness. "Olivia Holloway and her unborn child, a child the defendant knew about, a child whose existence threatened his plans, a child he was willing to sacrifice along with its mother to protect himself from the consequences of his own actions." Davis reminded the jury of the prenuptial attorney's notes indicating that Olivia had seen the pregnancy as motivation to address the couple's issues promptly, of her excitement shared with her sister and friends, and of her plans for the future that Liam had violently terminated. "This was not a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment," Davis concluded, "but a calculated decision to eliminate two problems permanently rather than face accountability." Defense attorney Winston Porter faced a courtroom palpably affected by Davis's powerful closing when he rose for the defense's final argument. "The prosecution has presented you with a narrative that appears cohesive," Porter acknowledged, "but a narrative is not the same as proof beyond reasonable doubt." Porter attempted to reframe the case as circumstantial, suggesting that while Liam had certainly made poor decisions, embezzling from the family business, lying to investigators after discovering Olivia's body, attempting to clean up what he thought might implicate him, these actions did not prove he had actually committed murder. "My client has admitted to his financial crimes and to his panic-driven attempts to distance himself from a death he feared he would be blamed for," Porter argued, "but fear and guilt are not the same emotion, and poor decisions in the aftermath do not prove he caused Olivia's death." Porter focused on what he characterized as gaps in the prosecution's timeline, suggesting alternative scenarios that might explain the physical evidence while maintaining Liam's innocence of the actual murder. "We know someone with a key locked that cellar door after Olivia entered," he acknowledged, "but the prosecution has not eliminated the possibility that someone else at the winery, someone with access to the keys, someone perhaps with a grudge against the McCaffrey family, might have committed this terrible act." This argument, however, failed to address the specific evidence of the hidden duplicate key with Olivia's blood and the wine compound on it, a weakness that was evident in the skeptical expressions of several jurors as Porter spoke. The defense closing attempted to recharacterize Liam's internet searches and actions as those of a man struggling with unexpected news of pregnancy rather than plotting murder. Yes, he searched for information about unwanted pregnancies, Porter admitted, as many shocked expectant fathers might do while processing such life-changing news. Yes, he was concerned about the financial implications given his already precarious situation. But making poor choices and harboring ambivalence about impending parenthood do not make someone a murderer. Porter suggested that Liam's financial crimes had created a tunnel vision among investigators, causing them to build a case against him while failing to explore other possibilities fully. Porter concluded by appealing to the jury's obligation to require proof beyond reasonable doubt, suggesting that despite the volume of evidence, the prosecution had not definitively eliminated all other possibilities. If you cannot say with absolute certainty that Liam McCaffrey struck that fatal blow, then you must return a verdict of not guilty on the charge of murder, he argued, though his tone lacked the conviction that had characterized Davis's methodical presentation. Legal observers noted that Porter's closing argument seemed to tacitly acknowledge the strength of the prosecution's case, focusing more on creating doubt than on offering a compelling alternative narrative, a strategy that reflected the difficult position the defense found itself in after 5 weeks of damning testimony and evidence. The prosecution's rebuttal, delivered by Assistant Prosecutor Vanessa Jimenez, systematically addressed each point of doubt Porter had attempted to raise. Defense counsel suggests someone else at the winery might have committed this murder, Jimenez noted, but cannot name a single person with the means, motive, and opportunity that the defendant possessed in abundance. She reminded the jury that no one else had a multi-million-dollar insurance policy on Olivia's life, no one else was facing exposure for embezzlement, no one else had Olivia's blood on a key hidden in their vehicle, and no one else had been caught in a web of deception from the moment police arrived at the scene. The defense is not offering you reasonable doubt, Jimenez stated firmly, but unreasonable speculation that ignores the mountain of evidence pointing directly to the defendant. Judge Helena Kavanaugh delivered her instructions to the jury on the afternoon of October 16th, carefully explaining the legal elements required for each potential verdict, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, or manslaughter, and the concept of reasonable doubt. Your duty is to evaluate the evidence presented and determine whether the state has proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt, she instructed, emphasizing that while absolute certainty was not required, the evidence must exclude any reasonable hypothesis of innocence. After nearly 6 hours of instructions covering various legal points and procedures, the case was formally handed to the jury at 4:23 p.m., with deliberations scheduled to begin the following morning. The jury's deliberations lasted just 4 hours and 27 minutes, a remarkably brief period given the complexity of the case and the volume of evidence presented over 5 weeks. At 2:50 p.m. on October 17, 2023, the court received notification that the jury had reached a verdict. As word spread through the courthouse, spectators and media representatives rushed to secure seats in the courtroom while both families were notified to return for the verdict reading. The Holloway family entered together, Bernadette leaning heavily on Marcus's arm, their faces tense with emotion after the long journey toward justice for their daughter. The McCaffreys entered separately, Robert and Travis taking seats near the back of the gallery, while Evelyn, who had not returned to court since her emotional outburst, slipped in just before proceedings began, her face partially concealed by dark glasses. As Liam McCaffrey was led into the courtroom by sheriff's deputies, his expression was blank, eyes focused straight ahead as he took his place beside Porter at the defense table. Judge Kavanaugh called the court to order, the usual procedural formalities seeming to stretch endlessly as the packed courtroom held its collective breath. The jury filed in, their expressions uniformly solemn as they took their seats, several glancing briefly at Liam before fixing their gaze on the judge. When asked if they had reached a verdict, the foreperson, a retired school principal named Margaret Wilson, responded firmly, "We have, Your Honor," and handed the verdict form to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. Judge Kavanaugh reviewed the document silently, her expression offering no hint of its contents before she returned it to the bailiff for reading. In the case of the State of Missouri versus Liam Patrick McCaffrey, on the count of murder in the first degree, we the jury find the defendant. The bailiff's voice rang clearly through the silent courtroom. Guilty. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, followed by a sob from Bernadette Holloway, while Chloe gripped her parents' hands tightly, tears streaming down her face. Liam showed little visible reaction beyond a slight stiffening of his shoulders, his gaze remaining fixed on the middle distance as the bailiff continued reading the jury's additional finding that the murder was committed with special circumstances, premeditation, and financial gain, making him eligible for the death penalty under Missouri law. As the verdict was recorded, Judge Kavanaugh thanked the jury for their service and announced that the penalty phase would begin the following week, during which they would hear additional evidence before determining whether to recommend life imprisonment or death as the appropriate punishment for Liam McCaffrey's crimes. Phase 10. The sentencing phase of Missouri v. McCaffrey began on March 10, 2024, nearly 5 months after the guilty verdict, following multiple defense motions and procedural delays. Kansas City had endured a particularly harsh winter, and the courthouse steps were still edged with dirty snow as the Holloway and McCaffrey families once again made their way into the imposing structure, this time to determine Liam's punishment rather than his guilt. The intervening months had taken a visible toll on both families. Bernadette Holloway appeared to have aged years since the trial began, while Robert McCaffrey's once robust frame had diminished, his shoulders hunched beneath the weight of his son's crimes. Judge Helena Kavanaugh had permitted cameras in the courtroom for this phase of the proceedings, recognizing the significant public interest in the case while establishing strict guidelines to maintain the dignity of the court. The prosecution's case for the death penalty focused on 3 aggravating factors. The murder was committed for financial gain, it was premeditated with substantial planning, and it involved the killing of Olivia's unborn child. This was not a crime of passion or momentary weakness, Prosecutor Davis told the court in his opening statement for the penalty phase, but a calculated business decision made by the defendant. He weighed the financial benefits of Olivia's death against the consequences of his embezzlement being exposed, and he chose to kill her and their unborn child for profit. Davis argued that the methodical nature of the crime, from taking out the life insurance policy months in advance to the elaborate cleanup and frame-up attempts afterward, demonstrated a level of premeditation that warranted the ultimate punishment. Victim impact statements provided the most emotionally wrenching testimony of the sentencing phase, with Bernadette Holloway approaching the witness stand supported by her husband, her body seemingly frail, but her voice surprisingly steady as she addressed the court. "Olivia was the center of our family," she began. Clutching a framed photograph of her daughter, she filled every room with light and every heart with joy. Bernadette described how the family had been shattered by Olivia's murder, how holidays and birthdays had become painful reminders of absence, rather than occasions for celebration. We lost not only our daughter, but our grandchild, a future we never got to know. Birthdays we'll never celebrate, a graduation we'll never attend. As she spoke of the grandchild, Bernadette looked directly at Liam for the first time, her grief momentarily hardening into something more pointed before she returned her gaze to the judge. "No punishment can bring them back," she concluded, her voice finally breaking. "But justice demands that the man who took 2 lives for money face the fullest consequences of his actions. Marcus Holloway's testimony carried the quiet dignity of a father's grief, his weathered hands gripping the rail of the witness stand as he recounted how he had looked forward to walking Olivia down the aisle only to walk instead behind her casket. "I built things all my life," he said, his voice deep but unsteady with emotion. "Houses, furniture, a family, but I cannot rebuild what was taken from us." He described how Olivia had been his only daughter to follow him into architecture, how they had shared a special bond over blueprints and design concepts, and how he now found himself unable to practice the profession they had loved together. "Every drawing reminds me of her, of the designs we'll never collaborate on, of the home she'll never build for her own family." Marcus concluded his testimony by speaking directly to the defendant, who kept his gaze fixed downward throughout. "Liam, we welcomed you into our family," he said, his voice finally breaking, "and you repaid that trust by stealing our future." Chloe Holloway's victim impact statement provided insight into the personal dimensions of loss that extended beyond the immediate family. "Olivia wasn't just my sister," she testified, occasionally pausing to collect herself. "She was my best friend, my confidant, the person I called first with every piece of news, good or bad." Chloe described their shared childhood, their plans to raise their children as close cousins, and the daily struggle of reaching for her phone to text Olivia before remembering she was gone. "I lost half of my conversations," she said, tears streaming unchecked down her face. "The other half of my memories, the person who knew all our inside jokes and family stories." She described how she had been helping Olivia plan her wedding, how they had spent weekends visiting venues and tasting cakes, activities that should have culminated in celebration, but instead became painful memories of what would never be. "Her death left a Olivia-shaped hole in my life that nothing can ever fill," Chloe concluded, "and some days I can barely breathe around the edges of it." The defense's case against the death penalty centered on humanizing Liam through testimony about his childhood, mental health struggles, and potential for rehabilitation. Dr. Samuel Harrison, a forensic psychiatrist who had evaluated Liam extensively since his conviction, testified about finding evidence of narcissistic personality disorder and financial addiction. Mr. McCaffrey displays classic symptoms of pathological narcissism, including an inflated sense of self-importance, a preoccupation with fantasies of success, and a belief that he is special and should associate only with high-status individuals, Dr. Harrison explained. These traits, combined with his compulsive spending behaviors, created a psychological perfect storm when his financial house of cards began to collapse. While Dr. Harrison acknowledged that these conditions did not excuse Liam's actions, he suggested they provided context for understanding the criminal behavior and argued that, with proper treatment, Liam could be rehabilitated. Evelyn McCaffrey's testimony for her son represented perhaps the most complex emotional dynamic of the sentencing hearing. Having publicly accused him of killing her grandchild during the trial, she now found herself pleading for his life while still grappling with the magnitude of his crimes. "I cannot defend what Liam did," she stated, her voice barely above a whisper as she addressed Judge Kavanaugh, "and I mourn deeply for Olivia and the grandchild I will never know." She paused, visibly struggling with conflicting emotions before continuing. "But I am still his mother, and I believe there is still something in him worth saving." Evelyn described Liam's childhood, his academic achievements, his volunteer work during high school, his early ambitions to expand the family business, painting a picture of potential, tragically derailed by what she called a gradual moral collapse as adult pressures mounted. Robert McCaffrey declined to testify during this sentencing phase, his absence from the witness list speaking volumes about the fracture within the family. Travis, however, took the stand to offer a complex perspective as both Liam's brother and a representative of the family business his brother had betrayed. I cannot reconcile the brother I grew up with and the man who committed these terrible acts, Travis testified, his expression pained as he occasionally glanced toward Liam. I have spent months trying to understand how someone raised with the same values and opportunities could make such devastating choices. Travis described how the winery, once the pride of their family, had struggled in the aftermath of the murder and embezzlement, with longtime customers distancing themselves from the McCaffrey name and staff departing due to the association with tragedy. 2 families have been destroyed by my brother's actions, Travis concluded, and while nothing can repair what he has done, I ask the court to consider whether taking his life will heal any of these wounds or simply create more suffering. Several of Liam's former teachers and mentors testified to his earlier character, describing a bright, ambitious young man who had shown promise and generosity before his apparent moral decline. Dr. Eleanor Wright, his undergraduate business ethics professor, recalled a paper Liam had written about corporate social responsibility that had won a departmental award. It is difficult to reconcile the thoughtful student I knew with the man convicted of these crimes, she testified, which suggests to me a profound psychological breakdown rather than innate evil. Father Michael Donovan, the McCaffrey's longtime parish priest, spoke about Liam's volunteer work with the church's homeless outreach program during his high school and college years, describing him as once deeply committed to helping others, before something fundamental changed in his character. The prosecution's rebuttal witnesses included Dr. Lauren Martinez, a forensic psychologist who had reviewed Dr. Harrison's evaluation and conducted her own assessment of Liam. While I agree that Mr. McCaffrey displays narcissistic traits, Dr. Martinez testified, I disagree with the characterization of these traits as mitigating factors. In fact, his narcissism manifested as an extraordinary sense of entitlement that allowed him to value his own financial comfort above 2 human lives. She described Liam's apparent lack of genuine remorse, noting that in her interviews with him, he had shown more concern for his own circumstances than for the suffering he had caused the Holloway family. His expressions of regret appear performance-based rather than reflective of true empathy, she concluded, suggesting a continuing danger rather than potential for meaningful rehabilitation. Several former employees of McCaffrey Vineyards testified about Liam's treatment of staff in the months leading up to the murder, describing increasing instances of verbal abuse, blame-shifting, and manipulation that they now recognized as signs of his deteriorating ethical boundaries. He fired our accountant when she questioned some of the vendor payments that were later identified as part of his embezzlement scheme, testified former office manager Dianne Reynolds. He told everyone she had made serious errors that could have damaged the business, when in fact she was doing her job by identifying irregularities. These testimonies painted a picture of a man whose moral compass had been steadily failing for months before the murder, contradicting the defense narrative of a sudden breakdown or momentary lapse in judgment. In his closing argument for the penalty phase, Prosecutor Davis returned to the premeditated nature of the crime and the lives that had been taken. Liam McCaffrey did not snap in a moment of passion, he reminded the court. He calculated the financial benefit of Olivia's death, secured it with a life insurance policy, and executed his plan with meticulous attention to detail. Davis argued that the methodical nature of the crime, combined with Liam's apparent lack of genuine remorse, warranted the death penalty as the appropriate punishment under Missouri law. This murder checks every box for capital punishment. It was committed for financial gain. It was extensively premeditated. It involved the death of an unborn child, and it was carried out with cold efficiency against a victim who had shown the defendant nothing but love and support, despite discovering his betrayal. Defense attorney Porter's closing argument appealed to broader questions about the value and purpose of capital punishment. The death penalty cannot bring Olivia back, he argued, nor can it heal the wounds suffered by either family in this tragic case. Porter suggested that life imprisonment would serve the purposes of justice, protecting society from potential future harm, punishing Liam for his crimes, and providing him with the opportunity for the psychological treatment Dr. Harrison had testified was necessary. Executing Liam McCaffrey may feel like justice in the emotional heat of this moment, Porter told the court, but I urge you to consider whether death serves any purpose that life imprisonment without the possibility of parole would not accomplish just as effectively without the moral burden of taking another life. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their sentencing recommendation on March 13, 2024. The courtroom was even more packed than during the verdict announcement, with national media in attendance and a crowd gathering outside the courthouse despite the unseasonable cold. Judge Kavanaugh reviewed the jury's recommendation silently before announcing that she would deliver the sentence the following day, allowing both families one final night to prepare for the conclusion of the legal proceedings that had consumed their lives for nearly 18 months. As court adjourned, reporters noted the distinct separation between the families. The Holloways huddled together in mutual support, while the McCaffreys remained divided, with Robert and Travis exiting immediately while Evelyn lingered, watching Liam being led away by deputies, her expression hidden behind her now familiar dark glasses. On March 14, 2024, Judge Helena Kavanaugh's courtroom was silent as she prepared to announce her decision, the usual procedural murmurs absent as all present seemed to hold their breath in anticipation. Liam McCaffrey stood between his attorneys, dressed in a charcoal suit that had become noticeably loose during his incarceration, his expression carefully neutral, though observers noted the slight tremor in his hands. Judge Kavanaugh began by acknowledging the profound tragedy that had brought everyone to this moment, expressing her condolences to the Holloway family for their immeasurable loss. She then methodically reviewed the aggravating and mitigating factors presented during the sentencing phase, her measured tone giving no indication of her ultimate decision as she weighed the premeditated nature of the crime and its financial motivation against the testimony about Liam's earlier character and potential for rehabilitation. Liam Patrick McCaffrey, Judge Kavanaugh finally addressed the defendant directly, her voice taking on a new gravity. You have been found guilty of murder in the first degree with special circumstances, a conviction supported by overwhelming evidence of your guilt. You planned and executed the killing of Olivia Holloway, a woman who loved you, who was carrying your child, and who, evidence shows, was seeking to help you despite discovering your betrayal. The judge paused, her gaze fixed firmly on Liam, who had finally raised his eyes to meet hers. The jury has recommended, and I concur, that the appropriate sentence for this crime is death. A gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by a strangled cry from Evelyn McCaffrey, while Bernadette Holloway whispered, "Justice for my baby," just loudly enough to be heard in the first few rows. "You killed my grandbaby," Evelyn McCaffrey suddenly shouted, rising to her feet as her composure finally shattered completely, her dark glasses falling away to reveal eyes swollen from months of weeping. "My son is innocent," she cried, even as her previous accusation hung in the air, the contradiction embodying the impossible position of a mother who both knew her son's guilt and could not bear to accept it. Court officers moved quickly but gently to escort her from the courtroom as Judge Kavanaugh called for order, the commotion briefly drowning out Bernadette Holloway's repeated mantra of "justice for my baby," until Marcus gently urged his wife to silence, his arm around her shoulders as tears streamed down both their faces. After order was restored, Judge Kavanaugh continued with the formal aspects of the sentencing, setting the execution date provisionally for March 15, 2025, subject to the automatic appeal process required in capital cases. She addressed Liam directly one final time before concluding the proceedings. "Mr. McCaffrey, you made a series of choices that led to this moment, choices to steal, to deceive, and ultimately to take a life rather than face the consequences of your actions. Those choices have not only cost Olivia her future, but have now determined yours as well." As the judge adjourned court for the final time in this case, Liam was led away by deputies, his eyes briefly meeting those of his father across the courtroom in what observers described as the only moment of genuine emotion he had displayed throughout the entire proceedings. The aftermath of the sentencing saw both families navigating their new realities in distinctly different ways. The Holloways established the Olivia Holloway Foundation, which funded both pregnancy support services and financial literacy programs for young couples. "We want some meaning to come from this tragedy," Bernadette told reporters outside the courthouse after the sentencing, "some light to emerge from this darkness." The foundation's first initiative included a scholarship for architectural students at Olivia's alma mater, ensuring her professional legacy would continue despite her death. Marcus, previously unable to return to his architectural practice, found purpose in designing the foundation's first physical building, a support center offering both practical assistance and counseling for families affected by domestic violence. The McCaffrey family's fracture became permanent in the wake of the sentencing, with Robert filing for divorce from Evelyn after 35 years of marriage, citing irreconcilable differences stemming from her continued insistence on Liam's innocence despite the overwhelming evidence. The family winery was sold to an international conglomerate 6 months after the sentencing, with Robert stating simply, "There are too many ghosts in those barrels now." Travis remained in the wine industry but relocated to Oregon's Willamette Valley, changing his last name legally to his mother's maiden name to escape the shadow of the McCaffrey murder case. Evelyn, isolated from her remaining family, became a fixture at anti-death penalty protests. Her personal tragedy transformed into a cause that gave her a community of support among activists who embraced her story regardless of their individual beliefs about her son's guilt. The brass key that had featured so prominently in the trial, originally intended as a wedding gift but transformed into evidence of murder, was eventually returned to the Holloway family. After all, appeals were exhausted. Bernadette had it framed alongside a photograph of Olivia, the engraving L&O Forever Begins, 10/29/22, now a poignant reminder of the future that never arrived. "We choose to remember the love that prompted this gift," Chloe explained at a foundation fundraiser, where the framed items were displayed rather than how it was misused. This philosophy guided the Holloway family's gradual healing process, acknowledging the full horror of what had happened while refusing to let it define their memories of Olivia or their own lives moving forward. As the provisional execution date approached in early 2025, legal experts noted that the appeals process would likely extend the final resolution of the case for years, perhaps even decades, given the complexity of death penalty litigation in Missouri and nationwide. This legal reality meant that while the courtroom phase of the case had concluded, the full story of justice for Olivia Holloway remained unwritten, with both families locked in a limbo of waiting. The Holloways for final closure, the McCaffreys for the slim possibility of reprieve that would extend far beyond the dramatic Kansas City courtroom, where a judge's gavel had fallen on that cold March day, pronouncing a sentence that matched the finality of the crime it punished. What remained certain, regardless of how the legal process ultimately concluded, was that two families had been irreparably altered by one man's choices, and no judicial outcome could ever truly restore what had been lost in that winery cellar on an autumn evening in 2022.